Her name was Claire Mitchell. She was 26 years old, quiet but strong-willed, and happiest when surrounded by the silence of the forest. Hiking wasn't just a hobby for her. It was a way to breathe, to reset, to escape the noise of city life. On an unusually calm morning in October 2022, Claire signed in at a ranger station at Mount Rainier. She exchanged a polite smile with the attendant, adjusted the straps of her pack, and walked onto the trail. Her destination was solitude. She promised her family she would be back by Sunday night. She never came back. For days, search teams combed the park. Helicopters circled overhead, dogs traced faint scents, volunteers covered miles of rugged ground. They found nothing. No tent, no campsite, not even a scrap of gear. It was as if Claire had stepped into the trees and simply vanished. 18 months passed. Her family mourned, but without answers, grief never settled. The case grew cold, until one spring afternoon in May 2024, when two climbers made a horrifying discovery. They were scaling a bluff near Tolly Peak when the wind carried a sharp, sour smell. At first, they thought it was an animal. But as they followed it, their eyes caught on something that made their stomachs turn. High above the ground, swaying gently between the branches of an old Douglas fir, hung a body. When rangers arrived, the scene only grew stranger. Claire's clothes were still intact, her body preserved by cold air and altitude. Her wrists were loosely bound, tied in a way that looked more symbolic than secure. Her boots were missing, yet placed neatly on the ground below, side by side, facing north. And directly beneath her, arranged with unsettling precision, lay her cracked phone and her driver's license. It wasn't just a discovery. It was a message. The questions came fast, but the answers did not. How had Claire ended up so high in the tree without climbing gear? Who had taken her boots off, only to place them carefully beneath her? Why were her belongings arranged like a ritual? And why had 18 months passed without a single trace until now? Locals had their own explanation. They spoke, as they had many times before, of the Rainier Triangle, a mysterious stretch of wilderness where hikers vanish without a trace. Some blamed unstable terrain or sudden weather shifts. Others whispered about cult activity, strange lights, or something darker hidden in the trees. Claire's story quickly became one of the strangest and most unsettling cases linked to the area. Because her death did not feel like an accident, yet nothing about it fit neatly into the box of homicide either. It was staged, deliberate, and yet unexplainable. Tonight, we retrace her last steps. From the moment she walked into Mount Rainier National Park, to the desperate search that followed, and finally to the shocking discovery that left investigators speechless. We'll explore every possibility. Accident, suicide, foul play, even something more mysterious. But one truth will remain. None of these theories explain everything. Because the forest doesn't always give back what it takes. And when it does, it often leaves behind more questions than answers. Before she became a name whispered in forums and podcasts, Claire Mitchell was simply a young woman trying to find her place again. At 26, she had built a life that looked steady from the outside. A modest apartment, a steady job at a marketing firm, a circle of friends who admired her quiet strength. But beneath that surface, Claire carried a weight few people noticed. She wasn't reckless. If anything, she was careful to a fault. Her family often teased her for being the one who double-checked the locks twice before bed, the one who carried extra batteries just in case, the one who always sent a text when she got home. She was dependable, responsible, the kind of daughter and sister who remembered birthdays and never left a message unanswered. But the year before her disappearance had changed her. A long-term relationship had ended suddenly, and the breakup left her shaken. She stopped sharing as much on social media, spending more weekends alone with books or walks in the park. She was still Claire, thoughtful, gentle. But her friends noticed the difference. Her younger brother recalled her saying once, "I just need space. The city feels too loud. I want to hear myself think again." That's where hiking came in. Claire had always loved the outdoors, but in the months after her breakup, the trails became her sanctuary. Forests gave her the silence she craved. Climbing ridges gave her the sense of strength she needed. The wilderness was not a place of danger for her. It was a place of clarity. She wasn't the kind of hiker chasing thrills or Instagram photos. She didn't climb for attention. She went because the rhythm of her boots on dirt, the smell of cedar and pine, and the hush of wind in the canopy made her feel steady again. Her family worried sometimes. Hiking alone carried risks. But Claire was experienced, organized, and cautious. She researched her trails, carried the basics, a map, food, a small stove, and her camera. She wasn't a survivalist, but she wasn't naive either. The weekend she disappeared was supposed to be simple. October had been unusually calm, the weather mild, skies clear. No storms in the forecast. Claire told her family she would spend 2 days near Mount Rainier, camping lightly and returning Sunday evening. "It'll be quiet," she said. Just what she needed. Quiet. That one word would echo later in ways no one expected. When she packed her gear that Friday morning, her sister noticed she was almost cheerful. A small backpack with only what she needed. Her Nikon camera strapped carefully inside. A folded map marked with handwritten notes. She hugged her mother goodbye, promised she'd call when she was back, and drove away in her silver Subaru. At the ranger station, she signed her name in the log. The attendant remembered her as polite but reserved, speaking little more than a few words before walking into the trees. It was routine. Ordinary. Nothing about. Claire suggested that she was stepping into a story that would haunt everyone who knew her. In the days after her disappearance, people would search for meaning in those final interactions. Did she seem tired? Did she look sad? Was there any sign that she was planning something other than a weekend hike? But the truth was simple. Claire was just Claire, a young woman searching for peace. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't running. She was just walking into the mountains she loved, the mountains she trusted, believing she would walk back out again. But Claire never returned. And that is where the silence began. On the morning of October 14th, 2022, Claire Mitchell drove her silver Subaru east, leaving the city behind. The highway narrowed, the noise of traffic fell away, and soon the only sound was the steady hum of her tires and the rush of wind through the evergreens. She had chosen Mount Rainier before, but this time her destination was the Ohanapekosh area, a quieter section of the park where trails wove through mossy trees and rugged ridges. It wasn't the kind of hike casual visitors picked. The switchbacks could be steep, the paths sometimes overgrown. But Claire wasn't looking for easy. She was looking for stillness. By mid-morning, she pulled into the small lot near Laughing Water Creek trailhead. She parked neatly, as she always did, and tucked a folded napkin note in the console. In her handwriting, it read simply, "Be back Sunday night. Should be quiet." To anyone else, it looked like nothing more than a reminder. But later, for her family, those words would carry a chilling weight. Before entering the park, Claire stopped at the ranger station to sign in. The ranger on duty remembered her clearly, a young woman with a calm face and a light pack. She exchanged a polite hello, noted her intended area, and signed her name in careful script. No nervousness, no hesitation. Just another hiker beginning another weekend adventure. The ranger would later say she seemed quiet but confident. At 10 a.m., Claire stepped onto the trail. The weather was unusually steady for October, mid-60s, light clouds, no storms on the horizon. Conditions were nearly perfect. She wore her favorite gray hiking jacket and boots broken in from years of use. Her Nikon camera hung at her side, and in her pack were the usual essentials: a compact stove, freeze-dried meals, a journal, and a small solar charger. It wasn't much, but for Claire it was enough. She knew how to move lightly and carry only what mattered. Other hikers who passed through the area that day remembered little more than a solitary figure moving steadily along the trail. She didn't linger, didn't chat. She walked with the kind of focus that came from knowing exactly where she was headed. That was the last confirmed sighting of Claire Mitchell alive. When searchers later retraced her steps, they noted how ordinary the start of her trip had been. Nothing was unusual. Her car was found parked exactly where she had left it, locked, undisturbed. Inside were empty snack wrappers, a half-full water bottle, and the napkin note. Her wallet was in the center console. Everything in its place. It didn't look like a woman preparing to disappear. The first miles of the Ohanapekosh Trail are steep but beautiful. Moss drapes from branches like curtains. Streams cut through the undergrowth, their waters cold and quick. For hikers who love solitude, it's paradise. But it's also the kind of place where trails narrow, where cell service dies within minutes, and where one wrong step can leave you far from anyone's help. Claire knew this, but it didn't stop her. She trusted her skill. She trusted the mountain. Later, when investigators pieced together her movements, they found nothing beyond that trailhead record and faint impressions that could have been her boots. The forest gave back no clear path, no campsite, no gear. It was as though Claire had walked into the trees and simply vanished. The trail didn't just end for her, it swallowed her. And from that moment on, silence followed. On Monday morning, October 17th, Claire's desk sat empty. Her co-workers weren't alarmed at first. Maybe she was running late. Maybe she'd taken an extra day off. But Claire wasn't the kind of person who missed work without notice. By noon, the whispers started. By evening, the worry reached her family. Her mother called her first. No answer. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. Her younger brother sent a text. "Hey, you back yet? Call me." No reply. Hours passed. The silence stretched longer than it should have. By that evening, the unease hardened into fear. Claire wasn't careless with communication. She always checked in. Even if it was only a short, made-it-safe text, she never left her family guessing. Her sister tried calling again late that night. Still nothing. The phone rang once, then cut to voicemail. The sound of her recorded voice, cheerful, ordinary, felt like an echo from a world that no longer existed. The next morning, her mother filed a missing persons report. Rangers at Mount Rainier took the call. It wasn't the first time they had heard a worried voice on the other end of the line. But when they looked at the logbook, there it was. Claire Mitchell. October 14th, Ohanapekosh area. She had signed in, but never signed back out. That detail carried weight. By Tuesday afternoon, Rangers drove to the Laughing Water Creek trailhead. And there it was. Claire's silver Subaru, parked neatly along the pull-off, just as she had left it days earlier. The car was locked, no signs of tampering. Inside, Rangers found snack wrappers, a half-full water bottle, and her camera bag in the back seat. Her wallet was still tucked in the console. Everything looked ordinary, untouched. But there was one small detail that sent a chill through them. The folded napkin note. "Be back Sunday night. Should be quiet." It was the last message Claire had left behind. The note wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a goodbye. It was the kind of thing a cautious hiker might scribble before heading out. But now, in the context of her absence, those words cut differently. Her family rushed to the trailhead as soon as they heard. They stood by her car, staring at the silent woods that stretched endlessly behind it. Her mother clutched a thermos of coffee, though she hardly drank from it. Her brother walked circles, scanning the tree line as if Claire might step out at any moment, smiling and apologizing for the scare. But the forest didn't move. That first night, rangers advised patience. Maybe she had been delayed. Maybe she had decided to camp an extra night. But her family shook their heads. Claire was responsible. She wouldn't disappear without a word. By dawn the next day, the waiting ended. The search began. Dozens of rangers and volunteers lined up at the trailhead. Search dogs strained at their leashes, noses pressed to the ground. Helicopters circled above, their rotors beating against the thin mountain air. Drones scanned ridges and ravines. But by sunset, there was nothing. Not a campsite, not a trail of wrappers, not a single broken branch or discarded item to show she had ever been there. The mountain had swallowed Claire whole. Her mother sat in her car that night, staring at the forest with red eyes. Her brother refused to leave, standing near the ranger truck with a flashlight in his hand. And the search teams promised they would keep looking. But already the mood had shifted. In the quiet of the trailhead parking lot, one ranger muttered under his breath, "This doesn't feel like a normal case." And deep inside, Claire's family knew he was right. The forest was silent. Too silent. And now, that silence carried the weight of fear. By Wednesday morning, the search for Claire Mitchell had grown into one of the largest operations Mount Rainier had seen that year. At dawn, rangers marked grids on maps, dividing the forest into sections. Search and rescue teams were briefed in clipped, urgent voices. Volunteers from nearby towns arrived in hiking boots, ready to walk until their legs gave out. The trailhead filled with vehicles, dogs barking, radios crackling. The forest that had been silent now buzzed with activity. Helicopters lifted off, circling low over the trees, their rotors chopping the air. They scanned ridges, ravines, and clearings with thermal cameras, hoping for the faint outline of a human body against the green. Drones followed, weaving through narrow canopies where helicopters couldn't reach. On the ground, dog teams pushed forward. Noses to the dirt, tails stiff, they pulled their handlers into thick brush and down steep embankments. At first, hope flickered. One dog picked up a faint scent, leading searchers to a muddy switchback where they found impressions. The shape of boots pressed lightly into the soil. But the trail ended there. The prints vanished into mud, washed out by recent rain. No direction, no continuation, just silence. Searchers spread wider. They combed the ground for any sign, a piece of fabric caught on a branch, a granola wrapper, a torn strap. Rangers marked trees with ribbons to track areas already cleared. Every few hours, teams rotated out, blistered and sore, while fresh volunteers stepped in. But the forest gave nothing back. Day after day, the search pushed deeper. By the end of the first week, the numbers were staggering. More than 60 rangers, 30 volunteers, 5 dog teams, and 3 helicopters had covered over 50 square miles of rugged terrain. They checked riverbanks, crawled through ravines, even rappelled down cliff faces. Still, no sign of Claire. Her family remained at the trailhead through it all. Her mother arrived each morning, clutching a thermos she rarely drank from, and stayed until the last searcher returned at night. Her brother walked up and down the lot, restless, watching the tree line as if Claire might step out at any moment. Volunteers tried to comfort them, but words felt thin against the vastness of the mountain. Reporters began arriving by the weekend. Cameras pointed toward the forest. Headlines spread. Young woman vanishes near Mount Rainier. By the second week, the mood shifted. At first, there had been urgency, a rescue mission. But as days turned into weeks, the energy changed. Searchers grew quieter. Their eyes carried the weight of statistics they didn't want to say out loud. After 72 hours, survival chances in the wild dropped sharply. After a week, the odds were grim. Still, they searched. One ranger described the feeling bluntly. She didn't just vanish. She was erased. Because that was what made Claire's case different. In most disappearances, there are clues. A campsite disturbed, a backpack, a shoe. Even animals leave signs. But here, there was nothing. Not a trace. It was as though the forest itself had closed around her, leaving no mark she had ever been there. By the third week, exhaustion set in. Helicopters burned through fuel budgets. Volunteers' feet blistered raw. Dogs grew tired and restless. Each day ended with the same heavy silence. After 30 days, the official operation scaled back. Helicopters were grounded. Dog teams recalled. Only a handful of rangers continued slow, methodical sweeps in widening circles. But the tone had changed. No longer a rescue. Quietly, though not yet on paper, it had become a recovery. Claire's family refused to accept it. They stood at the trailhead, even as the crowd thinned, refusing to leave the spot where her car waited, as if she might appear any moment. But the mountain stayed silent. And in that silence, the weight of fear grew heavier than ever. 2 weeks into the search, when exhaustion had begun to dull hope, a ranger called in something unusual. Deep inside a ravine, nearly 2 miles from the trailhead, searchers found a torn black strap snagged on a low branch. Beneath it lay the scorched remains of a small camping stove, half buried in the mud. For a brief moment, hearts lifted. Maybe this was it. Maybe Claire had been here. The strap looked like it could belong to a backpack. The stove was the same brand she was known to use. Searchers marked the site, photographed everything, and radioed the news back to the base. The family was notified almost immediately. Her brother rushed to the ravine, climbing down with the rangers. He knelt in the mud, staring at the objects, desperate for answers. He wanted to believe these were hers, that finally the silence had broken. But the more investigators studied the scene, the stranger it felt. There were no footprints leading in or out, no drag marks, no signs of a fall, no broken branches that suggested someone had slipped. The stove wasn't shattered from impact. It was scorched, as if burned deliberately. And the strap? Its edge looked frayed, not torn, as though sliced clean rather than snapped under pressure. The site didn't look natural. It looked arranged. Rangers collected the items and ran them for testing, but the results came back inconclusive. No DNA. No trace evidence to prove they had ever belonged to Claire. Officially, the report listed the find as non-determinative. In plain words, maybe hers, maybe not. For her family, though, that answer wasn't enough. Claire's mother insisted the stove was hers. She had seen it in the apartment. Her brother argued that the strap matched the color of her pack. They clung to those details like lifelines. For them, It was proof she had been there. Proof she hadn't just vanished into nothing. But for the rangers, the discovery only deepened the mystery. If the items were hers, how had they ended up in a ravine that had already been checked twice? Why were they so neatly positioned? And why were there no other signs, no scraps of food wrappers, no clothing, no camp remnants? It was as if the forest had offered up just enough to tease, and nothing more. News of the discovery spread quickly. Reporters latched onto it. Articles ran with headlines like, "Clue found in Mount Rainier Disappearance." Online forums exploded with speculation. On Reddit, users dissected every photo, zooming in on the frayed strap, debating whether the cut looked clean or weathered. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to the find, some arguing it was planted, others claiming it was evidence of foul play. On YouTube, creators uploaded theories with ominous music and titles like, "What Really Happened to Claire Mitchell?" For the public, the case had shifted from a missing person to a full-blown mystery. But for the family, it was more personal. Claire's mother carried a photo of the stove in her purse, showing it to anyone who would look, convinced it was her daughter's. Her brother kept replaying the same thought. If she was there, why didn't we find her? Weeks stretched into a month. Searchers returned again and again to the ravine, combing every inch, but found nothing else. No body, no clothing, no answers. By day 30, the official operation scaled down. Rangers still walked the trails, but helicopters stopped flying, dogs were called back, and volunteers returned home. For officials, the case had shifted into the quiet file of missing presumed dead. But for her family, and for the growing wave of strangers following the case online, Claire Mitchell was not a file. She was a question, and questions like hers don't fade, they spread. 18 months passed. The seasons turned. Snow fell, melted, and fell again. Trails closed and reopened. For many, Claire Mitchell's name had faded from headlines, buried under new stories and fresher tragedies. But for her family, the silence never lifted. They lived each day with a hollow ache, wondering where she was, wondering if she had suffered, wondering if they would ever know. Then, in May of 2024, the forest finally spoke. Two climbers from Seattle, friends in their early 30s, had set out on a weekend climb near Tolly Peak, a remote and jagged corner of Mount Rainier, rarely visited by casual hikers. They weren't searching for anything except good rock and clean holds. But late that afternoon, as they worked their way around a bluff, one of them stopped suddenly. A smell drifted on the wind. Faint at first, then undeniable. It was the sour, heavy scent of decay. They followed it into a patch of old Douglas firs. At first, they thought they saw gear. Maybe a pack snagged in branches, maybe ropes left behind by another climber. But as their eyes adjusted, the truth froze them in place. Suspended nearly 30 feet above the ground, tangled between two high branches, was a human body. Thin, shriveled, preserved by altitude and cold. Clothes still intact, arms hanging limp. Head bowed, as if the forest itself had claimed her and left her swaying in silence. The climbers stumbled back, one of them retching into the dirt, while the other grabbed his phone with shaking hands. Within hours, rangers were on site, sealing the area, calling in additional support. A recovery team was assembled. What they saw only deepened the horror. Claire's boots were missing, but not lost. They were placed directly beneath the tree, side by side, facing north, as though someone had carefully set them there. Her wrists were tied loosely with paracord, not in a way that restrained her, but in a way that seemed more symbolic than functional, like a gesture meant to be noticed. And directly below her body, centered neatly on the moss, were her cracked cell phone and her driver's license, arranged, untouched, as though left there deliberately. It didn't look like an accident. It didn't even look like a typical recovery scene. It looked designed. The recovery was delicate. Rangers rigged pulleys and ropes, even bringing in a helicopter for lift support. Every angle was photographed, every item logged. The body had to be carefully lowered, inch by inch, from its unnatural resting place. As they worked, seasoned rangers exchanged uneasy looks. Some whispered it was the strangest case they had ever handled. One admitted later, it was like the forest had been keeping her, and then decided to give her back. The official chain of evidence was followed, but no one could ignore the details. The boots aligned north, the wrists tied loosely, the belongings placed like markers. Each piece suggested intention, not chaos. Her family was notified that evening. Her mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her brother drove through the night, silent the entire way, clenching the steering wheel until his hands ached. They had wanted closure, but this was not the kind they imagined. For investigators, the discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had Claire's body ended up 30 feet in the air, in a tree with no footholds and no climbing gear anywhere nearby? Why were her belongings arranged so precisely below her? And why had the forest remained silent for 18 months, only to reveal her in a place no one had thought to search? The answers never came that day. What they were left with was a scene that felt more like a message than a mystery. The mountain had spoken at last, and what it said was unsettling. When Claire's body was lowered from the tree and transported out of the park, investigators hoped the autopsy would bring answers. For months, her family had been caught in the grip of uncertainty. Now, with her finally found, there was a chance for truth. But the truth that came was not what anyone expected. The medical examiner's report confirmed what was visible. The cause of death was asphyxiation, consistent with hanging. That much was clear. The ligature marks, the position of her body, the alignment of her neck injuries, it all matched. But when it came to the manner of death, the examiner hesitated. Suicide, homicide, accident. None of them fit neatly. The final line of the report carried a chilling word: undetermined. Part of the difficulty was the state of her remains. Claire had been gone for a year and a half, but her body was far more preserved than most would expect. High altitude and cold mountain air had slowed decay, creating a leathery, mummified effect. Her clothing was still intact, her features still recognizable. It was as if the mountain had held her in stasis, refusing to let her vanish completely. The scene itself had been even harder to explain. Her wrists were tied with paracord, but not in a way that made sense. The loops were loose, the knots simple. If restraint had been the goal, it wouldn't have held. To some investigators, it looked more like a gesture, a symbol, something meant to be seen rather than something meant to control. Then there were her boots, not scattered, not lost in a fall, not torn from her feet in panic. They were removed and placed carefully at the base of the tree, side by side, both facing north. Investigators measured their position, noted their alignment. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Beneath her body lay two objects that made the scene feel even stranger: her driver's license and her cell phone. The phone was dead, its screen cracked, battery long drained. Yet the way it rested directly below her, aligned with her license, looked intentional. Not dropped, not misplaced, arranged. One investigator, speaking off the record, admitted, This doesn't look like a woman who got lost. This looks arranged. But arranged by who or what? There were no signs of struggle. No bruises that suggested she had been dragged. No broken bones beyond those in her neck from the hanging. No defensive wounds on her hands or arms. There was also no evidence of anyone else at the scene. No footprints, no foreign DNA, no discarded equipment. The ground below the tree was undisturbed, the moss soft and unbroken. It was as if Claire had been placed there without leaving a trace of how. The tree itself only deepened the puzzle. An old Douglas fir, nearly 130 feet tall, with its first branches far too high for anyone to climb without gear. Yet there had been no ropes, no ladders, no climbing tools found nearby. Helicopter placement was ruled out. The canopy was too dense. How did she get up there? Became the question that haunted everyone. Her family refused to believe she had climbed herself. Claire was careful, not reckless. She didn't carry climbing equipment. And even if she had, the positioning of her belongings below, boots, phone, ID, suggested something far more deliberate than a simple fall or a tragic choice. The medical examiner did not label it suicide. They did not call it homicide. They did not call it an accident. The box remained blank. For the rangers who had searched for her 18 months earlier, the discovery was both closure and torment. They had walked within miles of that very tree dozens of times. They had flown helicopters overhead, sent dogs through the brush, scanned with thermal cameras. And yet, the forest had hidden her. Until it chose not to. The case file swelled with notes, but held no answers. Claire Mitchell had vanished into the woods. Now she had been found in a place no one could explain, in a position no one could replicate, surrounded by details that whispered intention, but refused to name a culprit. It was a scene that felt less like discovery and more like design. And for the investigators who stood beneath that towering tree, staring at the empty space where her body had hung, one thought returned again and again. This didn't just happen. Someone, or something, wanted it this way. The day Claire's body was lowered from the branches, most of the recovery team thought the scene couldn't get stranger. The boots, the loose bindings, the belongings beneath her. It already looked staged. But the forest wasn't finished speaking. As investigators cleared the site, a junior ranger scanning the tree line noticed something odd. Wedged in a fork higher up, just above where Claire's body had been, was a flash of plastic. It glinted faintly in the sunlight, a small corner jutting out from the bark. At first, it looked like litter. But when the ranger climbed carefully and pried it loose, she realized it was a Ziploc bag. Weathered, fogged with condensation, but sealed. Inside were several folded sheets of paper. 6 in total, yellowed and stained from moisture, but still legible. The papers were handed over immediately, and what they contained turned the case from mysterious to chilling. The pages were written in Claire's handwriting. Her loops, her slant, her spacing, verified later by family and eventually the FBI. Each page carried fragments of her thoughts, dated in October 2022, beginning just one day after she vanished. The first line was simple, but unsettling. I heard them again last night. There was no context, no explanation of who or what them referred to. Just the sentence, as if she had picked up in the middle of something already happening. Another page read, "The trees are watching. Not all of them. Just the tall ones. The ones that never move, even when the wind does." Beneath the words were crude sketches, twisted branches that seemed to form eyes, and a figure that looked human but distorted. Long arms, wide, black eyes, a mouth drawn as a jagged void. Underneath, she had scrawled, "Not human, never was." As the pages continued, the handwriting grew shakier, more uneven. Ink smeared in places, lines slanting downward like they had been written in haste or fear. One passage read, "It's not a place you go to. It's a place that finds you. I thought I came here, but I was brought." Another, "They don't like light. They wait until the mind opens." And then, the final page, almost blank, only one sentence written clearly at the top. "If you find this, it's already too late." When investigators read the pages, a heavy silence fell over the room. For some, it suggested mental decline, paranoia, hallucinations, perhaps starvation or exhaustion. But others couldn't ignore how deliberate the placement was. The bag had been tucked carefully into the branches above her body, sealed tightly as though she wanted someone to find it long after she was gone. The FBI took custody of the pages. Tests were run. Fingerprints, DNA, ink composition. All confirmed the same thing. They were Claire's. No other prints, no foreign substances, just her. Her family was shown the writings only once. Her mother wept, shaking her head, saying over and over, "That wasn't my daughter." Her brother stared at the sketches, silent, before finally muttering, "Something happened to her out there. Something we can't explain." The journal raised more questions than it answered. If Claire had written these words, what had she experienced in those first nights after disappearing? Fear of someone watching her? Encounters she couldn't put into plain words? Or was it the mind of a young woman unraveling under isolation, hunger, and stress? For investigators, the writings offered no clarity. For the family, they offered only pain. But for the public, the online forums, the podcasts, the YouTube channels already obsessed with the case, the journal was proof of something darker. Proof that Claire hadn't just gotten lost. She had seen something. Something she believed wasn't human. And with that, her story crossed a line. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It had become a legend. When the details of Claire Mitchell's discovery became public, the bindings, the boots aligned north, the belongings beneath her, and especially the journal, theories erupted everywhere. Friends and family wanted answers. Strangers online wanted explanations. Investigators wanted closure. But the deeper people looked, the stranger it all seemed. The first theory was suicide. On paper, it was the simplest explanation. Claire had been heartbroken, withdrawn, and seeking solitude. Some pointed to her writings in the journal, paranoid notes about trees, figures, and voices, as signs of a mental break. Perhaps she had wandered off trail, spiraled into psychosis, and taken her own life. But even those willing to accept suicide struggled with the details. Suicide notes don't usually end with, "If you find this, it's already too late." Belongings aren't neatly arranged at the base of a tree. Boots aren't removed, cleaned of mud, and positioned facing north. And most troubling, how could she have gotten her body 30 feet up into the branches without gear? Suicide might explain her state of mind. It didn't explain the scene. The second theory was ritual. True crime forums were quick to draw parallels between Claire's death and cult-like staging. Loose bindings, symbolic placement of objects, boots aligned to the compass. It all felt ceremonial, as if someone wanted to send a message. The Pacific Northwest has a long history of whispered stories about hidden groups, secret gatherings in forests, rituals carried out in the wilderness. Could Claire have stumbled onto something she wasn't meant to see? Or worse, could she have been chosen for it? But investigators found no candle wax, no markings, no tools of ritual at the scene. Just her body, her belongings, and silence. If this was a ritual, it was one designed to leave no trace. The third theory was foul play. Maybe she had crossed paths with someone dangerous, another hiker, a drifter, someone who knew the park well enough to vanish without a footprint. The bindings could have been theirs. The arrangement of objects could have been staged to confuse investigators. But if foul play was the case, where was the evidence? No foreign DNA, no cigarette butts, no scraps of food or discarded gear. The forest floor was untouched, the moss beneath her belongings unbroken. Whoever had done it would have had to move with surgical precision, leaving behind nothing, not even a mistake. One ranger put it plainly. If this was murder, it was the cleanest scene I've ever seen. Too clean. And then came the fourth theory. The Rainier Triangle. For decades, locals had spoken of disappearances in the area, hikers who never returned, campers who went missing without a trace, even planes that went down without wreckage ever found. The triangle stretched across parts of Mount Rainier, a place where the ordinary rules seemed not to apply. Claire's journal gave new fuel to this lore. The trees are watching, not human, never was. To some, these weren't the words of paranoia. They were the words of someone who had seen something she wasn't meant to. Something alive in the forest, something that could hide her for 18 months and then return her in a way no human would stage. Skeptics dismissed the idea as fantasy, but the whispers spread. Paranormal forums dissected every line. Podcasts claimed Claire had encountered a presence beyond explanation. Some even compared her story to other vanishings in national parks, building the idea that the wilderness itself could sometimes take people. In the end, none of the theories fit perfectly. Suicide left too many deliberate details unexplained. Ritual lacked evidence. Foul play required an invisible, flawless suspect. And the paranormal, well, it asked people to believe in something beyond reason. Even the investigators, hardened by years of grim recoveries, admitted privately that the case defied logic. One ranger, who stood beneath the tree where Claire had hung, summed it up in a sentence that would echo through every retelling of her story. Something about this feels wrong. Claire Mitchell had vanished into the wilderness, and when the mountain finally gave her back, it gave no answers. Only a scene that looked less like tragedy and more like a riddle. And for her family, that riddle was worse than silence. 2 weeks after Claire's body was recovered, the official report was filed. The conclusion was clinical, almost cold. Cause of death: asphyxiation consistent with hanging. Manner of death: undetermined. 3 words: undetermined, case closed. Were all the law could offer after 18 months of fear and searching. On paper, Claire Mitchell's story ended there. In reality, it didn't end at all. Her family sat through the final briefing in silence. Her mother wept quietly into a handkerchief. Her brother stared blankly at the table. Later, outside the ranger station, he told a reporter, "The mountain took her, and it never gave her back." What they found wasn't Claire. It was just what the forest decided to leave behind. That grief was echoed in their daily lives. Her apartment was left untouched for weeks, as if they were waiting for her to walk back through the door. Her camera remained in its bag, never developed, a reminder of pictures she never got to take. The voicemail she had left months earlier, a simple, "I'll call when I'm done hiking," stayed saved on her mother's phone. No one could bring themselves to delete it. But outside the family, Claire's case had already grown larger than one tragedy. In town, these whispers circled faster than official statements. Locals avoided Tully Peak, shaking their heads when tourists asked about it. Some called it cursed. Others swore that after Claire's discovery, the woods there felt different, heavier, as if carrying a presence no one wanted to name. And the whispers weren't just about Claire. Old cases resurfaced in conversation. Other hikers who had disappeared near Rainier. Other names written in logbooks but never crossed out. A few residents muttered that the Rainier Triangle had taken her, just as it had taken others before her. Online, her story spread like wildfire. Podcasts dissected the autopsy. YouTube channels debated whether her journal was evidence of psychosis or something supernatural. Forums compiled maps of every disappearance near Rainier in the past 50 years. Each detail only added fuel to the fire. Through it all, her family remained silent, speaking only when asked, and even then, with words that carried more grief than anger. Claire's mother said softly in an interview, "She wasn't careless. She wasn't trying to disappear. She was just hiking, and the mountain decided otherwise." For investigators, the case remained a wound. Rangers who had searched for her still remembered walking past the area dozens of times, never realizing she was suspended above them. One admitted privately, "It felt like she wasn't meant to be found until then, like something was holding her." The case may have been closed on paper, but in the minds of everyone who touched it, family, rangers, locals, it lingered. A question without an answer. A silence that pressed heavier with time. And so Claire's story slipped into the same category as countless other mysteries tied to America's wilderness. Not solved, not explained, just carried. Carried by her family, who lived each day with the shadow of what they would never know. Carried by the locals, who avoided the trails they once walked without fear. Carried by strangers across the world, who whispered her name alongside words like impossible, paranormal, cursed. But mostly, carried by the mountain itself. Because some places resist explanation. Some trails end not with answers, but with echoes. And some mysteries, like Claire Mitchell's, do not close. They linger. Her file may be marked undetermined. Her story may be sealed in reports and interviews. But the silence of Mount Rainier still holds her. And in the end, that silence says more than any conclusion ever could. Because some mysteries don't end with answers. They end with silence.